So I remember a few years ago, I was in my bathroom looking in my bathroom mirror. I had the door locked. And as I was looking in the mirror, I was mad. I was mad and I was confused. And I had these antidepressants in my left hand. And I was looking in the bathroom mirror and looking at the drugs, looking in the mirror and looking at the drugs. And it was October 15th. And I remember on that day, I made a huge promise to myself that I would never take the drugs again. So at the time, I was prescribed 150 milligrams of Zoloft. And for anyone who is familiar with antidepressants, the initial dosage is about 25 milligrams and 50 is what they start you off at. But because of the severity of what I was going through, of the illness, I was at 150 milligrams. And so I started taking the medication because of the severe symptoms of depression, high anxiety, and I wanted to alleviate this pain. I didn't know what it was. Nobody ever told me, there's a possibility you can struggle with depression when I was growing up. So I had no idea. And I wanted to alleviate this pain. And I remember my doctor continued to up my dosage because my body became tolerant to the drug. And that's a whole different story. And I remember after I made that decision that day, if anyone is familiar with taking any sort of prescribed medication, any stimulant, or even drinking alcohol for a long period of time, if you stop cold turkey, there are medical withdrawal symptoms that come along with that. I see a few guys shaking your head. So I experienced some medical or withdrawal symptoms severely. It was to the point where I had to medically withdraw from UWF. So that was in 2015. It was my second semester here at UWF. And I had to go home for about two and a half months just to get well, just to get in a better position that I was in. And so that was the first time I was really introduced to stigma, to the stigma associated with depression and with mental illness. So for me, as a black man, right, who's supposed to be strong, as a black man who doesn't show any fear, any weakness, I was now in a position where I was having thoughts of suicide. The same black man who's supposed to overcome any adversity, any difficulty, because we built like that, right? We overcame slavery, right? And I can't overcome this. It was to the point where I was actually thinking about not living anymore. And that's a tough situation to be in, especially in America. I want to talk a little bit about the stigma. And as you can see on my first slide, the title of it is stigma. And there are a lot of stigmas associated with mental illness, depression in the black community. And I want to address some of those stigmas. The stigma is loud. It's very loud in the African American community when it comes to mental illness. And don't answer this question out loud, but if you want to, just close your eyes really quickly. And I want you to imagine somebody who is struggling with depression, and imagine somebody who is having thoughts of suicide. Now answer this question to yourself. What's their skin color? All right, so for me, you can open your eyes. For me, just to be completely honest, I see a white woman, right? I see a white man. Why is that? Because of the stigma. Just a quick thing you can do after this event, but I Googled, just to see how true this was, I Googled depressed person or depression in the images, the Google images, and it was maybe about 7 pages before I saw one black person, right? So what does that tell us? When we experience these symptoms of depression, of anxiety, it's not a black person thing, right? Suicide is a white people thing. Depression is a white people thing. That's what we're told. And therefore, when we feel these symptoms, when we have these different depressive episodes, we can't associate with it, and therefore we don't get help. So that's the first time I experienced the stigma. So let me say this before I move any further. Suicide is not a white people thing. It never has been, and it never will be. Did you know that suicide is the third leading cause of death in young black males ages 10 to 24? Before we leave this evening, I want to touch on 3 different stigmas. And I want to be able to dismantle these stigmas because it's literally killing us. The first stigma is that in the black community, symptoms of depression and anxiety, they're seen as signs of weakness rather than treatable medical disorders. Or a quick question before I go any further. Quick question. Just volunteer. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that when we think of depression and anxiety, we see it as something as being weak or a sign of weakness? Anybody want to? Yeah.
Because we belittle what is self-awareness
Mm-hmm.
because of what's socially going on. So it's as if there's worse things going on than what you're dealing with right now.
Got you. That's a big point. Anyone else? Why do we see it as a sign of weakness?
I say we probably correlate depression and anxiety to not being mentally strong.
Okay.
So if we have depression or suffer from anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
then we're weak-minded.
Got you. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, during chattel, so the males normally killed by the masters. The mothers normally have the responsibility of raising the child, so it would make them more submissive in order for them to survive in the circumstances, because they didn't want their child, the mother didn't want their child to necessarily get killed for acting out of order or for running away. So, having that masculinity type of feel to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Masculinity. That's a big one. The myth of masculinity. Anybody else? Yeah.
We don't talk about it in our families.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, for some girls, it's allowed, but for boys, like my dad will always say, we're winners, so we don't cry.
Mm-hmm.
Suckers cry, but we're winners, so we don't cry in this house. And so we would never talk about mental health.
Thank you. So before I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, my second semester, I was battling the symptoms heavily. And I remember I was talking to a really good friend of mine. We were on the phone. And she asked me a question. Why haven't I been seeing you at church lately? You've been missing. Because I'm one to, always be at church. And she asked me another question. Why haven't I been seeing you on campus as much? And, I kind of danced around the question. I didn't want to be open and honest because I didn't want to show any signs of weakness. And I answered, I'm just tired. It's a lot of homework I got to do and a lot of work. I work a lot of hours, so I'm just tired, which is why you don't see me at church. I use another excuse. I'm not at church because I'm trying to catch up on sleep, right? Now, let me show you how weak this response was. Church is literally an hour and a half, right? But I said, because I didn't want to show any signs of weakness, I need to catch up on sleep. And she continued to ask me questions because I knew she knew that something was wrong, but because I wasn't open right away, she wanted to dig deeper. She started asking me some more questions and detailed questions, and that's when I folded. I opened up about how I wasn't able to sleep at all. I opened up about how I wasn't eating, how I was losing weight, and how I was having these thoughts, these crazy thoughts that I didn't know where they were coming from. And she said, are you depressed? Have you heard of counseling and psychological services on campus? And I immediately got defenses. I was like, nah, not me. Now, I don't get depressed. People like me, I'm optimistic. People like me don't get depressed. But I'm not going to lie, after I got off the phone with her in that conversation, I was a little bit curious about, okay, what is counseling and psychological services? Because I was in a position to where I was so desperate, I was willing to do whatever it took just to feel better. So just with her mentioning, okay, you could possibly, if you're depressed, you could possibly get better by utilizing these services, I started to think about it a little bit. And don't we do it all the time? Wait until the situation gets worse before we do anything about it? Why is that? We do it all the time. Don't ever let desperation be the factor that enables your conversation. That's something that I had to learn and I continue to learn. Don't ever let desperation be the factor that enables your conversation. Speak up. If there's something that you're dealing with, a mental illness, depression, even if there's symptoms that you possibly can't identify, speak up. Don't let it get to the point where I was thinking about not living anymore before I said, you know what, let me open up and ask for help. There were two things that got in the way of me, seeing the therapist as soon as I could have or should have. And that's two things that we deal with every single day. Fear and pride. Now, I can speak on my behalf. I'm a black man raised in a Jamaican household. I got a lot of pride, right? And for me to open up and say, hey, I'm actually struggling with something, that's difficult. But it's when you let go of the fear of how you may be seen and let go of that pride of who you think you are, that's when you'll start to receive help. I want to talk about another stigma. When it comes to depression, how many of us know about this one? When it comes to depression, right, or any mental illness or any struggle, you got to pray it away. You got to go to church and start praying, right? I'm very familiar with that one. My dad used to be a pastor at the church I went to, right? So let me say this before I go any further. You will never be able to heal from a mental illness or disorder by just praying. Just a step further, even the Bible says faith without works is dead, right? So what does that mean? Works means going to the therapist. Works means being mindful of your mental health. Works is making the necessary adjustments to ensure you're not feeling this way. Works mean you're doing something about it. But what I was taught was you just pray about it. I remember I got home one evening from work and I called my dad and I was scared to have this conversation because I never opened up about depression. I never opened about the symptoms I was having. So I was worrying about, man, what is he going to think? I don't want my family to worry about, where I'm at and what I'm doing because I'm 10 hours away. And I started to open up and I said, Dad, I'm just feeling depressed. I literally don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel like going to work. I don't feel like going to class. I don't even want to work out anymore. And if you know me, I'm always in the gym, always doing something, some sort of rise and grind, some sort of physical activity, but I couldn't even work out. And I remember he paused. He paused for a moment and he asked me, hey, Abe, are you still going to church, right? And I said, yeah, I'm going to church, not as often because I just can't get the feeling to go to church, but I'm still going. And he said, okay, are you praying? You still been praying? I said, yeah, it's difficult to pray because I don't know what to pray about, but I still pray here and there. And he paused. And then he asked the most important question. Listen, the most important question. Abe, have you been paying your tithes? I said, what? My tithes? What does paying tithes have to do with feeling depressed and depression? Right? But because we have this preconceived notion that we can just pray it away. We can pay it away, right? Somehow this mental illness will just alleviate. And I love my parents to death. I love my dad. I love my mom. But they didn't understand. They still don't really understand what it means to suffer from a mental illness.